History often moves like a shadow, revealing only fragments while concealing the rest in silence. Between official records and battlefield legends lies a territory where truths were erased, reports destroyed, and lives deliberately forgotten. It is within this void that the forbidden files of the Second World War still breathe, hidden in steel cabinets, misfiled in dusty archives, or deliberately locked under government secrecy. What the public knows of that war, the speeches, the battles, the treaties, only tells part of the story. For every victory there was a betrayal. For every signed agreement, there was an unsigned one concealed in the margins. Across Europe, the ashes of war still hide countless unanswered questions. What convoys never reached their destination? What names were erased from university registers or intelligence lists? What whispers passed between sworn enemies, only to be silenced by sudden executions? The forbidden files reveal a world where operations were abandoned, but not forgotten, where entire groups of people vanished without explanation, leaving behind only scattered traces in coded telegrams and misnumbered dossiers. The Allied and Axis powers alike cultivated layers of secrecy so deep that not even their closest commanders were always informed. Even now, when these papers are unsealed decades later, the redacted lines and missing pages remind us that silence was a weapon, as lethal as any rifle or bomb. Each file is a portal into the forgotten machinery of war. Convoys that disappeared into forests without a trace, secret negotiations in ruined cities, plots of betrayal buried under Allied unity, and scientists who vanished into the fog of Dresden. These are not tales of glory, but warnings of what remained hidden. To walk into these archives is to step into a cold, unending corridor of history, where each door leads to a truth we were never meant to see. Chapter 1: The Vanished Convoy of Operation Iron Wolf. In the winter of 1944, the Eastern Front was collapsing. The Red Army's Operation Bagration had torn through Army Group Center, and the Wehrmacht was retreating westward in disarray. Amid this chaos, a file marked Geheime Reichssache Eyes Only emerged from the Bundesarchive decades later. The file described a convoy moving under the codename Operation Iron Wolf. It was a column of unmarked trucks and half-tracks leaving Königsberg under heavy SS escort, carrying what was listed only as Sonderfracht, special freight. The convoy was last seen heading toward the forest near Vilnius, its path swallowed by snow and silence. No wreckage was ever found, no remains recovered. For historians, it became more than a military footnote. It became a ghost. The convoy was guarded by men of the SS Totenkopf division, battle-hardened veterans notorious for their brutal reprisals on the Eastern Front. Their presence suggested cargo of extraordinary importance. Wehrmacht logs referred to the mission with vague notations, while accompanying Gestapo file numbers had entire sections blacked out. Bletchley Park decrypts later revealed frantic exchanges between Army Group Center and Berlin High Command around the same dates. The transmissions broke off suddenly, as if someone had ordered radio silence, leaving Allied codebreakers puzzled and wary. British intelligence filed the matter away under unresolved, never realizing that Moscow was conducting its own search. The NKVD had intercepted rumors from local partisans in Lithuania. Reports spoke of a long column moving through forest tracks under heavy snow. Lights blacked out, engines muffled with cloth to reduce their noise. Villagers later claimed to hear only the low hum of vehicles before silence reclaimed the night. When Soviet patrols advanced through the area days later, they found disturbed ground, abandoned tire tracks, and trees scarred by axe marks. Yet there were no bodies, no destroyed vehicles, no signs of battle. The convoy had simply evaporated. Speculation grew around the nature of the cargo. Some claimed it was Reichsbank gold, looted from occupied territories and hidden away as the Reich crumbled. Others suggested prototypes of chemical weapons from IG Farben, hurriedly moved to prevent capture by advancing Soviet forces. Still others believed the convoy carried records from secret atomic research under Kurt Diebner and Werner Heisenberg, documents the Allies desperately sought during Operation Alsos. The Gestapo's meticulous documentation style makes the missing sections even more suspicious. Why redact lists of crates, escort rosters, and fuel receipts if the cargo was ordinary? American OSS operatives, aware of the mystery through intercepted Soviet communiques, began their own hunt. Reports show agents dispatched into East Prussia in 1946 under the cover of displaced persons investigations. They interviewed farmers, foresters, and villagers, collecting fragments of testimony. One farmer spoke of soldiers burning papers in barrels by the roadside. Another remembered hearing the distant sound of explosions, though no craters were ever located. The Americans filed their report under Subject of Interest, Operation Iron Wolf, but its trail ended with a single line. Convoy not recovered. Cargo status unknown. Theories became darker as the Cold War deepened. Some intelligence circles whispered that the convoy was intercepted not by Soviet troops, but by Soviet agents embedded in the area. NKVD records from the Lubyanka, declassified after 1991, include a cryptic note: Subject Iron Wolf secured. Distribution per directive no. 7. What secured meant was never clarified. No crates or trucks appeared in Soviet post-war inventories, and none of the supposed scientific advances were documented in Moscow's archives. Others believe the convoy was deliberately destroyed by its own guards, buried in the forests, or blown apart with demolition charges to prevent capture. Yet no evidence of mass graves or wreckage has been found despite extensive searches. The convoy's escort, believed to number 80 men, left behind no records of survival. Their names do not appear on casualty lists, prisoner rosters, or post-war repatriation logs. Families filed missing person claims, but most were dismissed under the classification lost in the East. For some researchers, this silence suggests systematic erasure. If the men had perished in combat, there would be documentation. If they had been captured, their names would exist in Soviet prison registers. The absence of records implies deliberate removal. Whether by German, Soviet, or later Western intelligence remains unknown. As years passed, the legend of Operation Iron Wolf grew. Treasure hunters scoured Lithuanian forests, seeking gold, art, or weapons hidden beneath layers of snow and soil. None succeeded. What they overlooked was the chilling bureaucratic language of the surviving documents. Phrases like "not for regular file," "kein Eintrag," "no entry," and "permanent suppression" appear throughout the archival fragments. These were not casual notes, but deliberate efforts to erase knowledge from the chain of command. Someone had chosen not only to move the convoy, but to bury its memory. In 1963, a former Abwehr officer under interrogation in West Germany mentioned the convoy. He described hearing rumors of ghost transports sent eastward, shielded from Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht oversight. He insisted the missions were intended to move cultural assets and sensitive materials into secret caches for post-war recovery. His statement was filed and forgotten, overshadowed by Cold War concerns. Yet his testimony matched fragments of OSS and NKVD reports. A convoy operating beyond ordinary channels, shielded by secrecy, and erased from official history, Operation Iron Wolf remains a haunting case of disappearance without closure. Unlike treasure myths or wartime exaggerations, its existence is confirmed by multiple independent sources: German logs, Allied decrypts, Soviet reports. Its absence from the physical record is what makes it terrifying. Convoys do not vanish without a trace. Soldiers do not disappear without records. Crates do not dissolve into air. Yet here lies the exception, frozen in the snowbound forests of Lithuania, a phantom column erased by design. The surviving files leave readers with only fragments, redacted manifests, missing escort rosters, abrupt radio silences. It is as though history itself has been tampered with, rewritten by unseen hands. Operation Iron Wolf may never yield its truth, but in its silence, it reflects the deeper reality of the Second World War, that behind the chaos of battles and treaties lay deliberate acts of concealment, operations intended not just to fight the war, but to outlive it, buried in shadows for future generations to uncover and question. Chapter 2: The Hidden Pact of Smolensk Shadows. In the late months of 1942, as the Wehrmacht and the Red Army fought tooth and nail across the devastated ruins of the Eastern Front, a strange anomaly emerged in the intelligence records of both Berlin and Moscow. Buried in the Soviet archives, declassified only after 1991, were fragments of transcripts from clandestine meetings in Smolensk. The city had been captured by the Germans in 1941 and turned into a fortress of occupation, but within its shattered infrastructure, whispers of a secret pact began to circulate. The documents, stamped with NKVD insignia and marked "Do Not Circulate," speak of unauthorized discussions between rogue Abwehr officers and NKVD operatives. Their intent was simple yet treasonous: carve out a corridor of survival in a war that was consuming both sides without mercy. The meetings became known in coded references as Agreement Black Birch, a pact hidden beneath the rubble of Smolensk's burned-out churches and ruined streets. The context was desperate. German Army Group Center had bled heavily during the battles of 1941 and 1942, while Soviet units were reeling under catastrophic losses. Amid starvation, desertions, and the creeping disillusionment among frontline officers, certain men on both sides concluded that their own survival demanded collaboration. The Soviet side was represented by NKVD field officers tasked with interrogating captured Germans and suppressing partisan activities in the region. The Germans came from Abwehr Section 2, specialists in sabotage and counterintelligence. The transcripts suggest that the first contact occurred under the cover of prisoner exchanges in October 1942, conducted in the forests west of Smolensk. German officers brought cigarettes, bread, and captured documents, while the Soviets offered medical supplies and maps. The atmosphere described in the fragments was tense, with armed guards posted in the shadows and orders prepared to eliminate all participants should the talks be discovered. The topics of these covert discussions remain chilling. Both sides agreed on limited ceasefires along narrow sectors of the front to allow movement of supplies and the recovery of bodies. More sinister were the hints of intelligence sharing. German reports to Berlin hinted at unusually accurate Soviet awareness of partisan networks, while NKVD records reveal sudden breakthroughs in detecting German sabotage units. A captured Soviet document, labeled Smolensk Corridor, restricted, refers to a promise of information about partisan radio frequencies, while the German equivalent, Abwehr, file No. 2911, bears the cryptic annotation Kein Eintrag, no entry, where an operation summary should have been. That notation, familiar to intelligence historians, is the bureaucratic equivalent of a black hole, signifying intentional removal of incriminating material from the chain of command. The political implications of such a pact were immense. Stalin demanded absolute loyalty from his officers, enforced through commissars and political departments embedded in every division. To deviate was to risk immediate execution or disappearance into the gulags. On the German side, loyalty to Hitler was enforced by the Gestapo and the SS, leaving little tolerance for independent diplomacy. That any officers attempted such meetings reflects not only desperation, but also a willingness to risk annihilation for the hope of survival. Both sides apparently whispered of redirecting the fury of war westward, anticipating Allied landings in France and speculating about a post-war order in which Germany and the Soviet Union might once again negotiate a balance of power, as they had with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. The end of these negotiations was as abrupt as their beginning. In January 1943, NKVD internal reports flagged unusual activities among their field units. A courier intercepted near Smolensk carried partial notes referencing Black Birch, written in a hurried hand. Within weeks, Stalin's political officers unleashed a purge. The NKVD agents believed to have participated were arrested, tried in secret and executed. Their families vanished into the penal camps of Kolyma and Vorkuta. On the German side, evidence suggests several Abwehr officers were recalled to Berlin and reassigned, some later perishing in suspicious accidents. A few of their names appear again in post-war interrogation transcripts, hinting at knowledge of events they refused to detail. The collaboration ended, silenced by fear and blood, yet the shadows it cast linger in the archives. The Cold War made this file even more sensitive. When the Soviet Union collapsed and archives briefly opened in the early 1990s, researchers uncovered the transcripts, along with handwritten annotations from Stalin's political department. Unacceptable. Traitors. Erase record. Yet the files had survived because lower-level clerks had hidden duplicates in local archives rather than destroying them. Western intelligence historians, reviewing these documents, were startled by the precision of the records. The dates aligned with gaps in partisan communications, and German military diaries reflected unexplained lulls in combat in the Smolensk sector. These were not coincidences, they were the fingerprints of unauthorized cooperation. Some have argued that Black Birch was not truly a pact, but a temporary alignment of convenience, born from exhaustion and despair. Others contend it represented a genuine conspiracy to shape the war's direction. The fact remains that both sides killed their own men to bury the evidence, a reaction that speaks volumes. Betrayal in wartime carries many forms, but when enemies share intelligence against their own allies, the betrayal becomes seismic. The silence surrounding the events ensured they remained buried for half a century, until the fragments surfaced in crumbling folders. The human cost of this shadow arrangement remains impossible to calculate. How many partisans were betrayed by the intelligence exchanged? How many soldiers died because ceasefire corridors allowed one side to regroup and strike elsewhere? And how many families of executed officers never knew the truth of their loved one's fate? The absence of closure is itself a weapon, leaving history fractured and uncertain. The Smolensk shadows endure not because of what was revealed, but because of what was deliberately obscured. Agreement Black Birch remains one of the most disturbing reminders that war is not only fought on battlefields, but also in secret rooms, where survival and betrayal can walk hand in hand. Chapter 3. Churchill's suppressed Balkan coup dossier. In 1943, the Balkans had become one of the most volatile theatres of the Second World War. German occupation forces were stretched thin, fighting not only Allied raids and sabotage, but also two bitterly opposed resistance movements within Yugoslavia. On one side stood the Chetniks under Draža Mihailović, monarchist guerrillas with deep ties to the exiled Yugoslav government in London. On the other stood Tito's partisans, fiercely disciplined communist fighters whose successes in the field earned them growing favour in Moscow. The Allied powers found themselves torn between these factions. Officially, London and Washington supported both, but in practice, policy was fractured by suspicion and mistrust. Into this landscape entered a plan conceived in secret by Winston Churchill himself, a plan to tilt the scales of Balkan power through a covert coup. The blueprint was buried in a restricted MI6 archive labeled CX4529 Balkan and carried the codename Operation Damocles. The documents reveal Churchill's determination to prevent Yugoslavia from falling under Soviet influence after the war. In personal memoranda marked Prime Minister's Eyes Only, he expressed grave concern that Tito's growing strength would hand Stalin a foothold in southeastern Europe. The British government in exile, hosted in London, demanded continued support for Mihailovic's Chetniks. Yet reports from the field told another story. Chetnik units had been accused of collaborating with German occupation forces, striking at partisans more often than at the Wehrmacht. The contradictions created a political minefield, but Churchill remained focused on the post-war balance. His directives to the Special Operations Executive in Cairo were explicit: arm select Chetnik factions, sabotage partisan strongholds, and prepare a provisional government that would answer to London. Operation Damocles was designed as a layered coup. British SOE officers were instructed to funnel weapons and explosives through the Adriatic coastline, often via clandestine submarine deliveries under cover of darkness. Resistance liaisons in Montenegro and Bosnia were tasked with organizing assassinations of partisan leaders, while propaganda leaflets accused Tito's fighters of betraying Yugoslavia to Moscow. The ultimate aim was to trigger a crisis of legitimacy, collapsing the partisan movement from within, while positioning Mihailović as the only viable national leader. Internal documents list potential cabinet members for a London-friendly government, along with draft proclamations that would be broadcast once the coup succeeded. It was a bold gambit, and one that required near-perfect secrecy. But secrecy was already fractured. The Americans, who had shifted towards supporting Tito for his battlefield effectiveness, were uneasy with Britain's obsession over post-war political control. In late 1943, OSS field officers based in Bari leaked fragments of the Damocles plan to Soviet intelligence, either deliberately or through intercepted communications. Moscow responded with speed. The NKVD infiltrated Yugoslavia with operatives posing as local guerrillas, embedding themselves in partisan ranks to intercept and neutralize any British subversion. Soviet archives later revealed coded transmissions from Agent Volk, reporting daily on suspected British contacts and their attempts to sway Chetnik leaders with promises of arms and recognition. Stalin had no intention of allowing Churchill to shape the Balkans against his will. As Damocles stumbled, its fallout was swift and brutal. Several British operatives disappeared while attempting to rendezvous with Chetnik commanders in the mountains of Serbia. Their names were quietly removed from SOE rosters, their families told they had perished in routine operations. In reality, some were executed by partisans who had discovered their mission, while others fell into German hands during raids on suspected Chetnik hideouts. OSS cables intercepted in Washington confirmed American awareness of these losses, but the details were suppressed to preserve Allied unity. In London, Churchill ordered the Damocles file sealed under the 30-year rule, forbidding public discussion and warning ministers not to disturb the fragile cohesion of Allied purpose. The collapse of Operation Damocles left Britain humiliated in the Balkans. By 1944, the tide had turned decisively in Tito's favor. The partisans received open recognition and direct supply from both the United States and the Soviet Union, effectively sidelining Mihailovich and the London-based government in exile. At the same time, Damocles left scars within Allied intelligence cooperation. American distrust of British intentions deepened, while Soviet suspicion of Western meddling in Eastern Europe hardened into Cold War orthodoxy. What began as a coup to secure influence became instead a fracture that foreshadowed the post-war division of Europe. The suppressed dossier paints a grim picture of duplicity and desperation. It contains detailed lists of British operatives, requisition orders for explosives, and intercepted German communiques, noting unusual Chetnik activity in late 1943. Handwritten annotations in Churchill's own hand appear on several pages, including one chilling line: "Better Belgrade in ruins than Belgrade in Moscow's grip." Such words, now stripped of context, reveal the depth of his determination to shape Yugoslavia's future, even at the risk of sacrificing Allied soldiers and local civilians to another round of violence. When the file was finally released decades later, historians were struck by how effectively it had been buried. None of the official histories of the war mentioned Damocles. The men who carried its weight into the mountains had no graves, no medals, only erased names in forgotten ledgers. The consequences, however, lived on. Tito's Yugoslavia remained independent of both East and West, yet its scars from internal betrayal were deep. Britain's attempt to play kingmaker in the Balkans collapsed into silence, its failures hidden until the faded papers surfaced. Operation Damocles remains a warning. Even within the unity of Allied victory, shadows of mistrust and secret betrayal threatened to undo everything the world believed it knew about the war. Chapter 4: The Disappeared Scientists of Dresden Cell. In February 1945, the city of Dresden burned. Allied bombers turned its Baroque streets and cathedrals into firestorms that consumed tens of thousands of civilians. Amid the chaos, another story unfolded, buried in Gestapo archives and whispered through fragmentary testimony: the disappearance of an entire scientific research cell. The file was labeled Referat für B12 and stamped with the insignia of the Reich Main Security Office. Its contents described a group of physicists, engineers, and foreign specialists working under SS supervision in Dresden. The project was shrouded in secrecy, codenamed Weihnacht, night weapons. When the bombs fell, the scientists did not die in the inferno. Witnesses reported seeing them evacuated under heavy SS guard, loaded onto unmarked trains that vanished into the Ore Mountains. No bodies were ever recovered. Their names were struck from university rolls. Their families issued falsified death certificates. It was as though they had been erased by design. The Dresden cell had been assembled during the war's final years, when German desperation reached fever pitch. By 1943, the Reich faced total war, with Allied advances pressing from west and east. Resources dwindled, yet projects of staggering ambition continued. The Reich's atomic program, overseen by figures like Kurt Diebner and Werner Heisenberg, remained fractured and underfunded, but splinters of research proliferated. The Dresden group specialized in radiological applications and unconventional weapons delivery systems. References to uranium transports via Norway and prototype dispersal mechanisms appear in the fragments of the Gestapo file. IG Farben's name surfaces repeatedly, suggesting corporate involvement, though the specifics were lost to fire or deliberate destruction. The scientists themselves were an eclectic mix. Germans drawn from universities in Leipzig and Berlin, Austrian metallurgists, even 2 Czech researchers who had been forced into service. Their collective expertise hints at something beyond conventional weapons, something the Reich intended to unleash in desperation. The bombing of Dresden should have obliterated the cell, but instead it became the perfect cover for their disappearance. Survivors of the raids described SS trucks moving toward the Neustadt rail station in the early hours before the firestorm. Soldiers armed with automatic weapons formed tight cordons, blocking civilians from approaching. Neighbors reported seeing crates marked with radiation symbols, triangles painted hastily in red. The trains that departed that night were not listed on Reichsbahn schedules. Their cargo, both human and material, was erased from records. When American and Soviet troops later occupied the ruins, they found no trace of the researchers. What they uncovered instead were empty laboratories, half-burned documents, and abandoned equipment still warm from use. It was a disappearance executed with precision, leaving nothing but shadows. American intelligence took immediate interest. Operation Alsos, the mission tasked with capturing German atomic research, scoured Dresden in 1945. Reports filed by Colonel Boris Pash noted the absence of expected personnel and equipment. He wrote, "No confirmation of subjects known as Dresden Cell. Locals insist removal under SS guard before air raid. Cargo unknown. Recommend expansion of search into all mountain rail network." Yet the search produced nothing. No train wrecks were found. No tunnels revealed their secrets. Soviet intelligence, advancing from the east, conducted parallel hunts. NKVD reports claim to have intercepted fragments of documents referencing uranium ore and VNACT dispersal models. One declassified note from Lubyanka simply reads, "Several specialists secured, subject to relocation Directive 17. Whether this referred to the Dresden scientists remains contested, but the wording suggests deliberate obfuscation. The most chilling detail lies in the disappearance of identities. University records in Leipzig, Berlin and Prague list dozens of physicists and engineers abruptly struck from registers in early 1945. Families received notices that their relatives had died heroically during the Dresden terror bombing, though no graves were provided. Testimonies from widows decades later describe visits by Gestapo officers who ordered silence under threat of imprisonment. In some cases, pensions were denied on grounds of classified service, as though the men had ceased to exist. The paper trail vanishes in March 1945, coinciding with the cell's last known movement. After that, nothing. No denazification hearings mention their names. No post-war Allied interrogations include them, and no captured SS officers admitted knowledge of their fate. Conspiracy theories filled the void. Some claimed the Dresden cell had been absorbed into Soviet research institutes, feeding Moscow's post-war atomic program. Others suggested American forces secured them secretly, integrating their expertise into early radiological warfare concepts under Project Paperclip. Yet neither superpower's official archives list their names. The possibility remains that the cell was eliminated deliberately, executed and buried in hidden sites to prevent knowledge from leaking. A former Gestapo clerk, interrogated in West Germany in the 1960s, recalled orders to eliminate high-value personnel should capture be imminent. His testimony aligns with rumors of trains disappearing into mountain tunnels never to emerge. Whether those tunnels contained living scientists or their corpses remains unknown. The Dresden cell remains an enigma, not because of what is found, but because of what is missing. Every document that should exist, payrolls, train manifests, personnel files, was erased. The Gestapo file itself, preserved only in fragments, contains more redactions than text. In intelligence work, absence often speaks louder than presence. The silence surrounding the cells suggests coordinated effort at the highest levels to obliterate their memory. If they had survived, their names should surface in Cold War records. If they had died, graves should exist. That neither is true implies a fate deliberately hidden, locked in places still unrevealed. For historians, the Dresden cell is less a story of discovery than a warning. In war, entire groups of people can be erased not only physically, but historically. What remains is only the shadow of their absence, flickering in half-burned documents and fading memories of trains rolling east into the night. History never ends with the signing of treaties or the fall of capitals. It lingers in the unmarked graves, the missing files, and the shadows cast by stories erased before they could be told. The vanished convoy of Operation Iron Wolf, the hidden Pact struck in Smolensk's ruins, the Balkan coup designed and buried in Churchill's own hand, and the scientists spirited away from Dresden, all reveal a disturbing truth. Wars are not simply won or lost on the battlefield. They are sculpted in silence, rewritten by intelligence officers, politicians, and archivists who decide what may be remembered and what must be forgotten. Each of these files shows the lengths to which men will go not only to fight, but to conceal, to betray, to gamble on futures that never came to pass. And yet the fragments remain: a burned corner of a Gestapo ledger, a redacted NKVD memo, a British cipher with gaps that speak louder than its words. These remnants remind us that the war we think we know is only a fraction of the war that was. What else lies hidden, still locked away in state archives or buried in the forests of Eastern Europe? What convoys, what meetings, what human lives disappeared into silence, waiting to be unearthed decades later? The files that surface do not bring closure, they deepen the mystery. They warn us that history is not only a story of what happened, but of what we were never meant to see. The shadows of the Second World War remain, and their reach extends far beyond the ruins of 1945.